If 100 people online say that they tried something and it worked for their goats, does that mean that it really works? Well, it might sound like it, but there's a lot at play here. So, welcome to today's live stream. I'm Deborah, and today we are going to be talking about placebos. I have been totally intrigued with that topic ever since I was a girl and I saw an episode of MASH where they ran out of pain pills or pain medication, and they had a lot of people in post-op who were in a lot of pain, and Colonel Potter suggested that they give everybody a placebo and tell them that it's a really strong painkiller. And so they did, and people were not complaining as much. And so ever since I heard about that, I've always been super intrigued. Whenever I see a study published about placebo, I always read it because I just find it so incredibly fascinating. And so I could go off on quite a tangent about all of the placebo stories that I've read in humans, which are super, super fascinating. However, we don't talk much about human health on here. We primarily talk about goats and other livestock. So what I'm actually going to talk about today is caregiver placebo. And that is a thing. So first of all, I want to go ahead and share this study with you guys so that you can see. This is just one of the studies on it. It's kind of near and dear to my heart because I actually have arthritis in my knees, neck, and foot. And so this is a study about caregiver placebo effect for dogs with lameness from osteoarthritis. And basically, not only was the dog's owner subject to the placebo effect, but the vet was as well. And so this is why when you have carefully constructed scientific studies, they are double blind. That means that the people who are getting the medication and the researcher do not know who's getting the real drug and who's getting the placebo, because researchers can have bias too. And what they found is if you only have a single blind study, which means only the subject knows, only the subject doesn't know. If the researcher knows, they will act differently towards the person who's getting the placebo and the person who's not. And so there's a lot of things that can actually affect the outcomes. So you always want to have a double blind study. So whenever you're reading about studies in people and whether or not a procedure or a drug works, you want to see if it was a double blind study. And typically, if somebody is going to get a study published in most scholarly journals today, they're peer reviewed. And most people are not going to approve a study for publication if it's not a double blind. So anyway, I found this super cool because basically they found that 39.7% of dog owners thought that their dog was walking better after it was given a placebo. And that's pretty much in line with what you see for humans. For human drug trials, you usually see about a 30% placebo effect. So this is why, if somebody, if you take something and you say that and you're like, wow, that really helped. Well, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It could have been a placebo effect. And then 44.8% of the time, when the veterinarians examined dogs for lameness, they thought that they were improved after getting the treatment. But when they actually used a more objective means of determining if the arthritis had improved, they found that only 7 had improved over the 42 days of treatment. And that was out of 58 dogs. So it was actually a really, really small number that had improved. So 5 had gotten worse and 46 had remained unchanged. So this is a study that shows that this is a real thing. It actually happens among people who have animals. So Um, Here. Okay. So what I want to talk about is why it is really, really important to look for the science and to get the correct treatments, get treatments that have been proven to work. And I'm not just talking about worms. I know we have talked about worms so much in the last week. It is crazy. I see this a lot. So like this has been on my list of live streams to do for a really long time because I see this so much. Just a couple months ago, there was somebody who contacted me whose goat had hypocalcemia, and she had just given her a couple of Tums and thought that was going to take care of it because that's what people said on Facebook is you give them a couple of Tums. Well, the reality is a lot of people overdiagnose their animals on social media. There's this other little thing called med school syndrome. And that is that like when you learn about all the diseases, you now think you have them. And so sometimes people going through medical school are suddenly diagnosing themselves with all kinds of illnesses. And I have seen the same thing happen in social media. If somebody, many years ago in a chicken group, it was just unbelievable. One person had a chicken that was egg bound, and all of a sudden every other day somebody thought their chicken was egg bound. And I felt so sorry for the chickens in that group who were doing things because they thought that their chicken was egg bound. So poor chickens had a lot of physical interventions that they should not have been having. And that's all I'm going to say about the chickens. Back to hypocalcemia. So a lot of people, if well, first of all, a lot of people think their goat is in labor sometimes for like 2 weeks before she actually is in labor. And so they think that things are going wrong. And they're like, oh, I don't think she's as active. I think, oh, I bet she has hypocalcemia. And so they give her a couple of Tums. And because of placebo effect, they think she is now better. Well, the reality is the goat didn't have hypocalcemia, because if she did, a goat with hypocalcemia needs 5,000 grams of calcium. And a single regular Tums has only 500. And so 2 would be 1,000. So if your goat truly has hypocalcemia, they would need 10 Tums. And this is not my opinion. This is like the science. Dr. Van Son, a vet professor at Penn State University, has been on my podcast multiple times to talk about a variety of different nutritional issues. And if you want to check out the podcast I did with him on hypocalcemia, that's the dosage that they need is 5,000 grams if they legitimately have hypocalcemia. So when people incorrectly diagnose their goat, think, oh, my goat has hypocalcemia, and somebody on Facebook says, give it a couple Tums, and they're like, oh, it's better. It didn't have hypocalcemia to begin with. So you could have given it peanut butter. And if you believed that peanut butter was going to make it better, there's a 30 to 40% chance that the goat would appear to be better. So the other thing is that I see a lot is white muscle disease. And that is caused by a selenium deficiency. There are so many people who, their kids are born, and if the kid is not on its feet as quickly as people think it should be, everybody on Facebook is like, oh, give it selenium gel. Well, there's a lot of reasons why kids may not be on their feet very quickly. And one of them is temperature. Like, we live in Illinois. We have had goats give birth everywhere from 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Yes, 15 below 0 Fahrenheit. I really hope I never, ever do that again. In fact, we had more below 0 kittings than I want to remember. And all the way up to, 80 degrees. So depending on what the temperature is, there is a crazy difference in how fast a kid gets on their feet. If it is 50, 60 degrees, a kid will be on their feet looking for the teat within 5 minutes. If it's 40 degrees, you're looking more like 15, 20 minutes. And if it's below freezing, it can be 45 minutes, an hour. Like, I really, I don't know why it took me so long to realize, like, when it's below freezing, you really just need to get a blow dryer out there and get them dry as quickly as possible so that they are on the teat and nursing and they're able to stand and walk around and stuff. So anyway, the reason that and the thing about selenium gel, I did the math on the selenium gel years ago because y'all, I tried everything. Before kidding season, 20 years ago, I used to sit there with the catalogs. That was back in the day with catalogs. I would sit there with my catalogs and I would order like $300 of supplements and stuff that I thought I just had to have for kidding season. And so I would have all of that sitting there and thought I needed it. And then as I ran out of stuff and I started to realize like, I haven't used that in a long time. I ran out of it. I guess maybe I don't need it. So what happens, so with the selenium gel, actually, I did the math on that years ago. And I realized that there is not enough selenium in selenium gel to actually help an animal that is selenium deficient. When I got started, actually, one of the catalogs said that selenium gel was meant to be a daily selenium supplement. And that pretty much is about the only way that you would see any kind of an effect from it. So when Dr. Van Son was on the podcast and we talked about selenium, we actually did the math. So you guys could go listen to that selenium podcast, For the Love of Goats. Go listen to that selenium podcast with Dr. Van Son. And we run through the numbers on the selenium gel. And by the time he was done, I said, so somebody could give their goat a whole tube of this and it wouldn't hurt them. And he kind of laughed and said, well, it hurt their wallet. So what happens is that people don't know what to expect in terms of how fast a kid should be on their feet in nursing and what can affect it. If a kid gets hypothermia, the very first thing to go is going to be their sucking instinct. And that is fine muscle control. And so people are immediately like, oh, it's not sucking. It needs selenium. Well, if you stick your finger in their mouth and it feels like ice water, that kid has hypocalcemia and it needs to be warmed up. So again, a blow dryer, having the kid, I have, when it's below freezing, I have a heating pad sitting on my lap plugged in. And so the kid's sitting on my lap. So their bottom half is warm and I'm blow drying the top to get their top half dry. And the colder it is, the longer it takes to get a kid dry. When it's below zero, we're talking like 45 minutes. And so I usually have like, if a doe has 3 or something, like all 3 of them are on my lap and I'm just like going back and forth and brushing them with my hand, trying to get all of them dry at the same time. So what happens is, of course, if you have a chilled kid, you're going to be working on warming it up. And if the kid isn't on their feet and nursing, you better be working on getting colostrum into it, even if it means milking mom and giving that milk, that colostrum to the kid in a bottle or with a syringe, or even with a tube. And I just want to add real quick, do not use a tube on a kid that's cold, because if you tube feed a kid that's cold, they cannot digest the milk. If they're cold, their digestion system is not working. So you need to get them warmed up before you tube feed them. So anyway, like the selenium gel is just icing. Like it's not even icing. Like that makes it sound like it's good. The selenium gel is totally just a placebo. Like the problem with the kid is that it needs to be warm and it needs colostrum. Colostrum is liquid gold. In fact, I did a podcast episode with Dr. Van Son on colostrum, and I said, it is amazing. Y'all, it is amazing how incredible colostrum is. Like the real thing, right from mom. And after listening to all the things Dr. Van Son said about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I've always said colostrum is like liquid gold. Like it's even better than I thought. And it really is like colostrum. It's like, save your money do not buy the selenium gel. Just save your money. I don't care how many people on Facebook think that it has saved their goat. It is a total placebo. What saved that kid was colostrum. And if they didn't get colostrum into it, well, it died. If a kid does not get colostrum, they need 5% to 10% of their body weight in colostrum within the first 6 hours. And they need 10 to 20% within the first 24 hours. So it's really, really important that you get colostrum into them as quickly as possible after they're born. You get that colostrum into them, you're wasting your money on the selenium gel. The colostrum is what saved them. So That is placebo number 2 that I'm going to talk about. And then placebo number 3 that I'm going to talk about actually is DE. We talked about lie a lot in the last week, and that is a big placebo. Dr. Burke and I talked about it last night on a live stream. People who use that and think it's working they're basically victims of placebo, because those goats don't have the lye concentration that they're talking about using is so low that it's not going to kill worms. And so anyway, and those people don't have a worm problem. And so let me tell you, I'm going to tell you about one of my mistakes, and it doesn't have to do with lye. It has to do with DE, diatomaceous earth. So here is like back when I was new. If you've been following me for a while, you know that the reason I started following the science is because science saved my goats. We had complete dewormer resistance on our farm 16, 17, 20 years ago. None of the dewormers worked. If a goat got a bad case of worms, they were just going to die if they were not resilient enough to pull themselves back. So like most people, my goats were dying and I was desperate and I was willing to try anything. And I did. I tried 3 different kinds of herbal things from people who were selling them. Like, there's people selling like herbal formulas for worms and stuff. I tried there were only 3 back then. I tried all 3 of them. None of them worked. In fact, I had a buck who was down for a week and I was giving him double the dosage every single day. And I was doing fecals and the worm count was not going down at all. So I knew like that herbal thing did not work at all to actually kill worms. I tried Shaku Basic H, did not work. I tried apple cider vinegar in the water. I tried garlic. I tried wormwood dried. I tried wormwood fresh. I tried wormwood tincture. And the thing about wormwood is that, and we did before and after fecals, the thing about wormwood is that if you use 100% wormwood, that it would kill about 50% of the worms. And so if a goat doesn't have a really bad case of worms, it might help them. But if a goat is severely parasitized, like if it's got white eyelids, then killing only half of the worms is really not going to be enough to help that animal. So I decided, so this is why we had so many below zero kiddings, is because one strategy for helping your goats when you have dewormer resistance is that you kid in the winter. So we basically bred as many goats as possible to kid in January because we're in Illinois, snow is covering the ground. And so the worm load is very low. And as I say that now, it makes me smile at myself because it's like, I can't believe I didn't understand this sooner. So anyway, I decided I was going to devise this plan. And at this point, I already had my master's degree. And when I got my master's degree, I had to take a course in quantitative research. And I designed a study that I knew my college professors never would have approved. But I designed it this way because it was just more convenient for me. So the idea was we had 16 goats kidding that year. And it actually turned out to be 5 in January, 5 in February, 5 in March. And then 1, it was like end of April, early May. And so just to make it convenient for me, I decided that the 5 goats that kidded in January were all going to get DE, diatomaceous earth. The 5 goats that kidded in February, I think we were going to get an herb or something. And the ones that kidded in March, we're going to get something else. So I was trying all these different things. And the goats that kidded in January that got the DE all did great. Nobody had a worm overload. And so I gave 100% of the credit to the DE and said, wow, DE is amazing. Like it is a great dewormer. Whatever I used in February was a little better. And then what I used in March, not so good. And then there was one poor goat that kidded like into April, early May. And it was like, well, she's going to be my control animal. She's not going to get anything. And that poor animal was in horrible shape. Well, there's this thing in research called confounding variables. And this is why the reason that my professors in grad school never would have approved that study. And the reason that a study like that would not be accepted for publication into a scholarly journal is because it was not randomized. So the animals should have been randomized because I was using 3 different treatments. And I only had 1 control. So like you should have an equal number of controls and treatment animals, you know? So if I had 16 animals, then I should have had 4 for each group. So 4 got the DE, 4 got the herb, 4 got whatever the third thing was, and then 4 had nothing. And they should have been randomized, not all in 1 month, because what I learned after I learned the science, what I realized was that kidding in January is all you have to do to be able to not have a worm problem after goats kid. That's it. So that's why we wound up kidding all of our goats in January, because none of the dewormers worked. So we needed to have goats, have as many goats as possible kidding when there was as much snow cover and worms were not a problem at all in the environment. And then the other thing I learned too is like just keeping the goats. If goats kid once there's grass on the ground, just keep them in the barn so that there's no exposure. They're not out there picking up more worms. So what I thought I learned from that, it was completely placebo. Like I thought that the goats got better, but there was this variable that I hadn't accounted for. And one of the things that made me keep looking was that in the middle of summer when I had goats with worm problems, I was like, oh, well, DE is amazing. I'm going to use DE. And I gave it to the goats and it didn't work. It did not work in the middle. It didn't work in the middle of July because the reality is it hadn't worked in January either. It's just that the goats had it was just that the goats had a very low worm load in January. And so they didn't need a dewormer in January. And that is the goal. Like, you know, when people talk about like deworming their goats every month, that should never, ever be happening. If you think your goats need to be dewormed every month, something is wrong. If you're whatever you're seeing, there's either some kind of a placebo thing going on here, or you've got a different problem, like maybe you have a nutritional problem or something like that. But anyway, I hope that everyone has found this helpful and that you understand now why I follow the science and why you can't assume that something works just because somebody says it works. In fact, when a lot of times people contact me and they're like, have you ever had this problem and what did you do? And I said, well, it really doesn't matter if I've had it or what anybody has done. This is what the science says. Because when you look at the science, they are looking at much larger numbers than most of us have on our farms. And they are actually doing controlled experiments. So that herbal dewormer that I was using when my buck died, Dr. Burke actually did a study on that. And she had 2 groups. She had a control group and she had the herbal group. They basically started with a clean slate. They dewormed all of the goats with a chemical to make sure everybody was at 0 worms. And then they did the whole herbal thing with the herbal group. They did nothing with the control group. And then they gave everybody an equal amount of worms. They basically infected everybody with worms with an equal amount of worms. And what they found is that there was no difference at all between the 2 groups. Well, I shouldn't say, there was no statistical difference. If you look at the numbers, actually, the goats that were getting the herbal had actually higher fecal egg counts, but there is this term called statistical significance. And so the conclusion of the study was that there was no statistical significance between the 2 groups. But it's just kind of ironic that when you look at it, that the number, the worm counts in the goats that got the herb was actually slightly higher than the control animals. So I was not at all surprised when I saw that, because I had a goat that was just naturally infected, had a sky-high level of barber pole worm that was killing him. He did not stand at all for the last week of his life. And I kept giving him that herb in double doses every day until he died. And I was doing fecals, and there was never a reduction in those fecals. So it is really, really important. If you are specifically looking at something with worms, you have to do a before. Everybody just talks about doing a fecal after. And if you do it after, it is completely meaningless, because you don't know where you started. You know, like one of the things we talked about with the lye situation is that the goats or the animals in question are actually on a dry lot. And so if your animals are on a dry lot, it's very unlikely you're going to have a worm problem. And so it doesn't matter when you do a fecal, they're probably all going to be really low. And especially if you get old eggs or old poop. So that's the other thing too, is that the poop needs to be fresh from the goat, because if it's been sitting out there on your pasture or even sitting in your barn, the eggs are going to hatch. And the irregular fecal flotation is only looking for eggs. It would not see larvae. So if the eggs hatch, you're not going to be able to see anything, and you're going to think your animal has zero. So I hope this has been helpful. Skyrider says, I'd like to ask about what is the most common disease that makes goats lose weight. Super easy answer to that. It is parasites. Parasites is the #1 killer of goats. So that's why I am so adamant about teaching people about correct parasite control. I have a whole series of videos on the correct dosage of all of the commercial dewormers. So the biggest reason that those don't work is because people are giving the sheep dosage or the cattle dosage to their goats. And so it doesn't work. It's like you taking half as much penicillin as you're supposed to take. It's not going to work. So might help a little bit, but it's really not going to help you as much as it should. And can also lead to resistance, either antibiotic resistance if it's you taking half as much penicillin, or if it's, you know, giving your goats half as much dewormer as they need. And I get that a lot, unfortunately. A lot of people contact me because, you know, they've done everything their vet said. And the first thing I ask is like, well, what was the dosage of the dewormer? And it is usually the sheep dosage or the cattle dosage rather than the correct goat dosage, which is provided by the American Consortium for Small Ruminant Parasite Control. It's a group of parasite researchers who have actually done research with lots of fecals. Dr. Hart, who I used to talk to Dr. Hart a lot. He's retired now. I asked him one time, we were speaking at a conference together, and I said, do you know how many fecals you've done in your life? And he just laughed and said, well, I've done 3,000 last summer. So these are people who, they know their poop and they know their worms. So if you're watching this later and you've got a question, please feel free to post in the comments section below and we'll get back to you. Bye for now.